Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. First of all, kicking off with thanks to our new patrons, Jim Sommerer, Chloe Guttridge and Gregory Meadows. Thank you all very much for signing up. If you haven't signed up yet and you would like to know all about that, just go to www.patreon.com/The History Network and find out all about it there. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 26, Episode 4, The Battle of Leuctra, Part 2. This episode was written by Murray Dahm. Murray Dahm is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and the recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Combat 40, Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Alexander Confronts the Achaemenids 334 to 331 BC, from Osprey Publishing. He is a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. After the failed peace negotiations in 371, King Cleombrotus marched his army into Boeotia. He camped at the town of Leuctra and waited for the Boeotians to arrive. Accounts give the strength of Cleombrotus's army at 10,000 men, with up to 2,000 Spartan hoplites, the remainder made up of hoplites from other Peloponnesian allies. Thebes led a force of 7,000 hoplites from Boeotia, with perhaps 3,000 from Thebes itself. This was not the theoretical full strength of 11,000 Boeotian hoplites, but some were stationed on other military duties. The Spartans had 1,000 cavalry, the Boeotians 700. The Boeotians arrived and camped on a hill opposite Leuctra. Our sources have a great deal of detail about the number of omens regarding Leuctra. Several of these reveal that the plan to go to Leuctra and engage the Peloponnesians was a deliberate one. Tied up with this is the idea that Epaminondas and his associates knew they had tactics which could defeat the Spartans, although there is an alternate tradition of division among the Theban commanders. Epaminondas's decision to offer battle prevailed, and the following morning both armies drew up on the plain to the north of Leuctra and prepared for battle. Leuctra is a battle which is one of the most discussed in our surviving ancient sources, not to mention the vast number of times modern authors have attempted to reconstruct it. We have 4 lengthy ancient accounts of the battle, more than for any other important ancient battle. Diodorus Siculus, Plutarch, Xenophon, and Pausanias all provide us with lengthy accounts which highlight different factors. Unfortunately, among these 4 accounts there is also major confusion and disagreement, and so working out what actually happened and why our sources disagree is complicated. This confusion among the sources was noted already in antiquity. There are also a plethora of minor and anecdotal accounts of the battle which can add to our picture. The differences in the accounts are such that they cannot be reconciled without disregarding one or another of them, and so we must decide which version we trust more. Xenophon paints a reasonable picture of the battle, but one which gives no credit to the Thebans, or Epaminondas, gives no idea of Theban deployment, and he contradicts the picture from our other sources. Disregarding Xenophon, all the other surviving sources preserve a relatively cohesive picture of the battle and of Epaminondas's role in it, or one in which the elements do not contradict each other. There has been a trend in modern scholarship to do the opposite of this, to favour Xenophon's account and disregard the others, or make them agree with Xenophon. The difficulties with Xenophon as a reliable source for Theban history make this a very dangerous proposition, and one which gives a false sense of the way the battle unfolded. The reputation of Epaminondas and Leuctra for the remainder of antiquity would seem to cement that the picture from the other sources, and not that of Xenophon, is what transpired. Epaminondas had been elected one of the officials for the Boeotian League, a Boeotarch for the campaign. There were 11 of these Boeotarch officials. 4 came from Thebes itself, and the others from the remainder of the cities in the Boeotian League. Each also provided 1,000 hoplites and 100 cavalry. Hence, we can estimate their strength at Leuctra, where 7 Boeotarchs were present. Pausanias's and Diodorus's accounts make it clear that Epaminondas was regarded as the senior Theban leader and was the overall commander, and that it was his plan which was implemented. The tradition which attached itself to Epaminondas, crediting him with responsibility of the victory, should be trusted, as it is an overwhelming picture, with the exception of Xenophon. What is more, it is clear that Epaminondas's plan of battle was deliberate and premeditated, not some accident of happenstance. His reputation as a military genius should never be in doubt. On the field at Leuctra, Epaminondas drew up the Boeotian line, with the Thebans themselves on the left wing facing the Spartan king, Cleombrotus, who was, as was traditional, stationed on the Spartan right wing. This in itself was unusual, although it had been done before. Usually in hoplite warfare, the best troops of an army were placed on the right wing, and thus the best troops of the opposing armies never actually fought. What was also unusual was that the phalanx of Theban hoplites was drawn up 50 ranks deep. The precise depth of 50 shields is only mentioned in Xenophon. The usual depth of a hoplite phalanx was between 8 and 12 ranks deep. The depth of 50 at Leuctra was unprecedented. On previous occasions, the Thebans had deployed a deep phalanx of 25 ranks deep. The 300 members of the Theban sacred band, with their commander Pelopidas, were also stationed on the left, possibly as a front line or front few ranks. Their exact deployment has evaded scholars. The remainder of the Boeotian line was drawn up obliquely in echelon, that is, diagonally away from the massed Theban phalanx on the left. The reasons for this deployment were variously interpreted in antiquity, as containing troops of dubious loyalty, lesser quality, and even men arriving to the battle late. The tactic was deliberate, however, and it enabled Epaminondas to win the battle on his left flank, where it mattered, and not risk a battle anywhere else along the Boeotian line. He could control what happened in the Theban phalanx, and had developed his tactics to attack the Spartans. The remainder of his tactics at Leuctra were about keeping the remainder of the phalanx out of the fight, but present as a threat, and so preventing the remaining Peloponnesians from reinforcing their right wing. The advantages of a refused flank and an attack in echelon remain the same as they were on that first occasion they were implemented in 371. It is possible that Epaminondas deployed his cavalry as a screen in front of his phalanx, as a means of shielding his deployment from the Spartans. Deploying cavalry in front of a phalanx was, however, a long-standing practice. There may have been a preliminary cavalry skirmish. This detail is from Xenophon, although it seems unlikely. Spartan cavalry was some of the worst in Greece. Thebes is some of the best, something even Xenophon notes. Xenophon seems to use this engagement to excuse the Spartan defeat, the defeated Spartan cavalry becoming entangled with the Peloponnesian phalanx, and thus he robs the Thebans of credit for victory. Xenophon instead makes excuses for the Spartan loss, but gives no credit for the Thebans defeating them. Diodorus, Pausanias, Plutarch, and the anecdotal tradition do not mention cavalry during the battle at all, and so we can be sure it was considered primarily an infantry engagement in antiquity. Pelopidas led the charge of the Theban phalanx on the left, at the head of the sacred band, and was followed by the rest of the Theban hoplites. This advance took them deliberately towards the Spartans, and more importantly towards the Spartan commander Cleombrotus. Pelopidas had deliberately attacked the Spartan commanders before, at Tegira in 375, and did so again at Leuctra. As the Theban left advanced forwards, therefore, the remainder of the Boeotian line would not be required to fully engage with the corresponding part of the enemy phalanx. The Peloponnesians could not risk breaking formation to reach the remainder of the Boeotian line, especially as they were pushed back on their right wing. Diodorus tells us that the Boeotians actually withdrew as the Spartan army advanced. Again, this would make more sense as a deliberate plan than if the remaining Boeotians were cowardly. The battle would be decided by the densely packed Theban phalanx's clash with the Spartan right, elite versus elite, and this is indeed what happened. The Theban phalanx, led by the sacred band, smashed into the Spartan right, and after a time, where the fighting was even, felled Cleombrotus and much of his Spartiate bodyguard. This attack made great use of the mass of the 50-deep Theban phalanx, perhaps as few as 60 men wide, and concentrated on destroying not only the most elite unit in the enemy army, but also its command structure. This attack was economy of force personified, and centuries before von Clausewitz. We are told almost as an excuse that the Peloponnesian hoplites in the centre of the Spartan line were of doubtful loyalty, since after witnessing the devastating defeat of the Spartan right and the death of Cleombrotus, the Peloponnesian line broke and fled from the field. The defeated Spartans had already fled the field, leading the way for the other Peloponnesians. Plutarch and Xenophon tell us that 1,000 Spartans fell in the battle, a huge blow to Spartan manpower and one from which she could not recover. A Spartan boy trained in hoplite warfare from childhood and remained a hoplite till his 60th year. Losing that many men in a single engagement, more than Sparta lost in any other battle, crippled the city as a military force. She would never again dominate Greek politics. Other accounts of the battle have larger numbers of casualties, as high as 4,000 Peloponnesian dead. Losses on the Theban side range from a mere 47 to only 300. The Theban victory was complete. Summaries of the battle tell us that such an event and its significance had never before been seen. Whilst it is true that Sparta had been defeated in battle before, she had never lost such a significant proportion of her manpower in one battle. What is more, the Spartans had broken and run, something they had never been recorded as doing before, and something which showed that the Spartans were just as fallible as ordinary men. The damage to Spartan reputation was perhaps more damaging than to its manpower. Sparta was not destroyed, however, and still represented a tyrannical presence, according to freedom-loving Thebans, in Greece. Epaminondas's next actions showed how far-reaching his plan was, the complete overthrow of Spartan power. There has always been criticism that when Thebes and the Boeotians defeated Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra, they had no real plan to replace the Spartan domination of Greece with one of their own. Hence the Theban hegemony over Greece was short-lived and lasted barely a decade. One consideration is that Thebes only sought to end Spartan domination, not replace it, perhaps thinking that it would be enough to kill the tyrant, not replace him. The tactics devised for the Battle of Leuctra bear this out. They were specifically devised to deliver a crippling defeat to the Spartans on the battlefield. By achieving the destruction of Spartan military capability and leadership, the Thebans actually created a power vacuum within Greece, which would eventually be filled by Macedon under Philip II. That Thebes, and more importantly Epaminondas himself, did have a plan to utterly destroy Spartan domination of Greek politics can be seen in his next actions. In 370 BC, Epaminondas led an invasion of the Peloponnese itself, taking advantage of grievances against the Spartans in various cities of the Peloponnese. But all of that lay ahead. On the field of Leuctra, that July afternoon, Sparta's military reputation, along with many of its men, lay in ruins. Epaminondas had brilliantly and completely put into effect tactics with a specific result in mind, the utter destruction of the Spartan wing. That result was achieved with remarkable success, and the densely packed Theban Phalanx delivered a punch with a maximum economy of force unseen in ancient warfare to that time. Alexander the Great would be that lesson's greatest student. Combined with the Theban refused flank, it and echelon deployment have been rightfully studied and emulated ever since. That concludes the superb double episode of the Battle of Leuctra by Murray Dahm. In a couple of weeks' time we start another spectacular two-parter, the Spanish invasion and conquest of Mexico, penned by Paul Seaman, who has written for us before. We hope you'll be back to enjoy that with us, and as ever, if you're a patron, you get that a few days early. If you'd like to find out about becoming a patron, then go to Patreon, that's patreon.com/The History Network. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Dahm, read by Nick Barker.